Hi there, I'm Phil the Practical Gardener. This particular tip is on creating aesthetic spaces and dimensions that make your property a beautiful and engaging one that people will delight in seeing. I do realise that there's a lot of personal component about this. People prefer different styles, but nonetheless there does seem to be a basic understanding about things that we find aesthetically pleasing and engaging and those that we don't. As is usual, I'll be using my own property for illustration as well as other properties that I've filmed over time. I have to say that I don't have a PhD in aesthetics. However, I have obviously landscape properties all my life and gardened them, and I also did study art history at university at one stage many years ago, and I've always had a personal interest in visual arts, so I feel I have got some sort of a basis to use. I had an interesting example just recently. I was at a friend's house and was sitting looking out the window facing the house opposite. Although it was a perfectly standard house with a little arch on the fence line, for some reason that house was driving me crazy. I got obsessed with wondering what was causing this. Finally I realised the angle of the gable on the house hadn't been matched by the angle at the peak of the archway. I mentioned this to my host and she sighed that it had driven her to distraction, having to look across at this incongruence. So simple, yet so important. Similarly, I made a wall on one side of my house and painted it yellow. It annoyed me that on the other side of my house there was a very plain lean-to carport with ugly vertical slats. Fortunately, when I was complaining about it, an architect friend suggested that I put a sheet of plywood across the front of the carport at the same height as the wall on the other side and paint it the same colour. This gave a much improved sense of continuity. I doubt that a single visitor to my house has noticed this little feature, however it does subconsciously improve the overall impression of my house. This is because whether a garden appears pleasing to the casual visitor depends partly upon subliminal impressions, aspects that the casual viewer isn't actually aware of at a conscious level. A good design appeals to our innate sense of the aesthetic. This can be achieved by complementing the existing features of the house and the other elements, as should have been done with the house in my earlier examples. You need to be thoughtful and creative about how you interpret these factors. Some possibilities are using measurements of the house as a benchmark for those of areas that you landscape, such as the terrace or the patio. For example, if the rear of the house is 15 metres or 50 feet wide, you can add a terrace that is the same width. If this terrace is quite narrow, there is a danger of it appearing like a corridor, so you can divide it into two rooms with pleasing dimensions simply by using large pot plants. If the back door is now central to one of the rooms, it creates a pleasing formality. Likewise, the area of the backyard can be divided into two separate areas. The patio area here is in its own attractive rectangle separated from the ornamental pond. The pond in turn mirrors the width of the seating area on the terrace. The artwork in the corner of the patio is correctly proportioned to the size of the patio, neither embarrassingly insignificant or too dominant. So you can see that aesthetic principles can perfectly well be applied to a modest space and operated within a limited budget. Also, the house and garden become natural extensions of each other with the dimensions and features balanced. Existing features such as a garden shed or fence around a swimming pool can be utilised to useful effect in your design. A garden can be realigned to make its borders more coherent, or shrubs trimmed back to help creating a pleasing relationship between garden elements. Consider the golden rectangle or golden ratio 1 to 1.618 when planning garden elements. This creates a visually appealing sense of balance. For example, a lawn or garden pond could be 2 metres wide by 3.2 metres long. An equivalent in imperial would be 6 foot wide and 10 foot long. A long thin backyard that looks like a corridor can be divided into two rectangular garden rooms, each fitting with the golden ratio. If each room would still be poorly proportioned, use this as an opportunity to fill the unwanted space with a garden shed or a trellis with compost bin and other utility elements hidden behind. You don't have to be precise about the golden rectangle formula. You can simply mark out a plan design using pegs and strings, adjusting until you achieve pleasing proportions. I developed my own outdoor living area using the same principles. There are two areas, the main courtyard and the terrace running off the house. I constructed the walls for the courtyard using the golden ratio. The terrace was more like a corridor, so I divided it into two rooms with attractive dimensions using large pot plants. Keep the different elements in proportion to one another. For example, if you have a large lawn area, a small artistic feature might look forlorn and lost. Similarly, a large feature can loom over a small space. If you see a garden ornament in a garden shop, take a photograph and measure it, then consider how it would fit into the landscape on site before purchasing it. The same principle applies to plants, although in this case you will also have to consider their ultimate size. Again, I'll use my own garden to illustrate. I purchased a large pot, however it would have been lost in a general garden setting, so I framed it within an archway leading from my courtyard. To get it to the best dimensions relative to the arch, I constructed a simple plinth made out of pavers and placed the pot on that. On the other hand, when driving up to my house, the visitor was greeted with a stark concrete pad and a garage door. The area needed uplifting. I tried putting a large blue pot in the spot, but it looked sad and lost. Because of the scale of the area, the whole frontage of the house and a large open area, I commissioned a 4.5 metre or 15 foot high sculpture. I painted it with the same colours I used in other areas of my garden to improve continuity. If existing trees, shrubs or gardens create a problem by not providing the opportunity to create attractive spaces, you can consider steeling yourself and removing them. Existing elements have often been placed without consideration to aesthetics, or plants have outgrown their allotted space. Freeing up your property for development can suddenly create a sense of spaciousness and opportunity. That's it for this tip. So don't forget to subscribe and like this tip so you don't miss out on further ones. I do have ones on related topics, including garden rooms. By the way, I did produce one recently on wildflowers. This purple Linaria is a wildflower which has just grown all by itself over many years and self-seeded. I don't have to do anything about it whatsoever. I also did one on vertical gardens. Here is another vertical garden that I recently created, putting these air plants up the trunk of the palm tree. As I was doing it, I kept standing back and looking to see whether I had created the right scale for the area that I'm within here. So thank you for watching.